This October 25th, 2023 meeting of the Union Township Zoning Commission is now called to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Can we have a roll call, Mr. McCormick?
Yes. Mr. Outrich. Here. Mr. Wing.
Here.
Mr. Shannon.
Here.
Mr. Lewis.
Here.
Mr. Campbell.
Here.
Everybody's here.
Okay. Everybody have the opportunity to review a copy of the minutes?
I have. The minutes, there was a lot of discussion that the minutes didn't include. Is it because they were summarized in the minutes? Usually, I would almost expect to see several pages, but a lot of everything we discussed was just summarized in shorter statements.
Yes.
Okay.
And the minute taker in the office is essentially the front office person. So if we want her to, adjust how she's taking the minutes, I can certainly do that.
Yeah, I just don't know what, my only concern is if anything was of importance was said, and I can't think of anything at this time. There was a lot of conversation that wasn't, and how long do we maintain audio recordings?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that without asking the answer to that one.
Okay, maybe we could find out, just in case something would come up down the road, because we had extensive discussion on the text amendments, the accessory structures and the chickens, and that wasn't included in the minutes. But and I don't have a problem with it being summarized. I just want to make sure that we have the opportunity, if something would come up or questioned, could we go back to the audio recording? Or I know it's on YouTube.
Yes.
I don't know how long it's maintained there.
Well, I can tell you that I put the links on the website, and they go back to at least, I think, 2018. And beyond that, I don't know if that's that time period where the data became not usable. I'd have to kind of dive into that a little bit. Maybe we could ask Justin at some point.
Okay.
I don't know, that's one I don't have an answer to. But if the data's there, it's probably being kept as long as they can keep it. It's just a
Okay.
matter of where it's being stored.
All right, that's all I have. I'm good.
Okay. Any additions, corrections, deletions from the minutes? And I'll solicit a motion to accept the minutes as circulated.
I'll make that motion.
Any second?
I'll second.
Regularly made and seconded motion to approve the minutes. Ms. McCormick, if you'd call.
Yes, Mr. Outrich.
Yes.
Mr. Wing.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon.
Yeah.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
And it's passed.
Okay. And to clarify, those are the minutes from our September 27th, 2023 meeting for the record. So now we'll move on to old business. We have one item of old business on tonight's agenda, which is case number 3-23-T, which is a proposed text amendment to the Union Township zoning resolution specifically impacting Article 6, establishment of districts, and Article 7, supplementary district regulations, more specifically, new sections to be added to the regulation of solar energy systems. Mr. McCormick, if you present the new version of this, please.
Yes. So from the last meeting, I don't know that we really had many changes at all. The one section that I had stricken out, I had planned to leave it in there for discussion purposes, really, more than anything else. Even potentially moving forward with trustees so that they knew that we had had a discussion with the law director on that particular issue. So as far as the rest of the text, I don't recall us having any significant changes that I didn't fix at the last meeting. So the purpose and intent section, first of all, purpose and intent section starts at what's proposed to be Article 7, Section 750. And we enumerated everything as you see it all the way up to a new section 764 of Article 7. So the purpose and intent is much, if not the same as last month. I don't think we changed that. The definition section is the same, which is proposed to be section 751. 752, solar energy systems not requiring a permit, that's the same. 753, general requirements for all solar energy systems. I think that one was the same. Proposed section 754, design and construction. I believe those are all the same. Proposed section 755, solar energy system accessory systems essentially. That I think is the same. I'm scrolling through just to make sure. Pre-application meeting, proposed section 756 is the same. Solar energy systems, commercial, those, I think we did make a minor modification at the last meeting regarding the setbacks for one of these scenarios. I think it was just to tweak the wording a little bit. That's a pretty large section. I'm kind of skimming over here to see if there's anything else that I remember changing. I did send this to the fire department via the interim chief, assistant chief, because there is an emergency service component to this. Just seeing if he had anything to offer in terms of the text. If not now, then, you know, at least before the trustees would review it. So that's, I'm still waiting to get a response on that. That is a large section. 758, solar energy systems, commercial requiring conditional use permit. That's unchanged. 759, retention of expert assistant reimbursement by applicant is unchanged. And that's one that I had to go through pretty significantly with the law director team. Maintenance and inspection, 760, I think is unchanged. 762 is the one that we're proposing to not include. Avoidance and mitigation of damages to public infrastructure. And that's one that, if I remember correctly, that we were advised essentially to not put it in the zoning resolution, but to maybe encourage the township trustees to enact their own resolution regarding this particular item. Usually that, it's a bigger issue with like the wind energy systems where they're taking the large poles and the heavy equipment when they run on the roads, they're tearing up the roads, and then you're looking for them to fix what they broke, essentially. So that's what that section is really for. With solar energy systems, I'm not sure it's quite as big of an issue. You know, potentially would be if they were going over the same space over and over again with heavy truck, but I don't know that it's as common as the wind energy conversion systems, as far as how often that might happen. And 762 is the provision for variances, and that is unchanged. I think I had 764 referenced, didn't I?
Is there a 761?
Right, that I was going to point out.
We intentionally leave gaps sometimes, so that I'm not
Okay.
as concerned about.
Okay.
But right, there is no 763 or 64.
I'm gonna read, I probably took that out when we talked to the law director, so I'm gonna change that part of it to 762 in the
Okay.
staff report, because that would make more sense. Oops. Making it worse. Okay, and then otherwise, the only other things we're looking to make changes to are the references in the code where these would be specifically referenced as far as the solar energy systems for the commercial systems. That would be in sections 612 of Article 6. So for a state residential district, a commercial solar energy system would be a conditional use. And 662, I believe, is that is the business district. I think with the state residential, these conditional uses in each section kind of cross-reference each other. It's gonna take me a second to look at 662 to make sure it is what I think it is. Yeah, it's the business zone conditional uses. So that is what I thought it was. Otherwise, we're looking at Article 6, Sections 613, 623, 634, 653, 663, 673 as accessory uses for the solar energy system accessory systems. And then Article 6, Section 671 as a principal permitted use, the solar energy system commercial. And that's, I think, the industrial zone, yep. I've got a typo there, I see it. So that is everything, without going over things too in-depth. I can try to address any questions you may have or issues you may have about the text that you might have seen in the last month.
Okay, there are no members of the public here to offer comments, so we'll close that public section of the commission's meeting and discuss it amongst ourselves. Does anyone have any comment or questions for Mr. McCormick regarding this text amendment?
I do not.
No.
I mean, we sort of talked, we talked about it at the last meeting.
Yeah, we covered it pretty thoroughly,
I-
and
that's
the
what I thought.
changes that we had all agreed to are what I'm seeing here.
Right.
The items you moved, and then the evaluations we made of the items suggested by council, and most of those we accepted, and a couple of them we kept the way they were, so I'm comfortable.
Yeah, I think we all have agreement on this. Okay.
If you want, I could form a motion to approve this resolution, unless you have,
I think
Oh,
I've
you're
got
ready
one
to
that I
do it?
can do.
good deal.
So, regarding case number 3-23-T, zoning resolution text amendment. The zoning commission finds that the proposed text amendments to the Union Township zoning resolution is consistent with the intent of the zoning resolution and the comprehensive land use plan 2030. The modifications being considered apply to Article 6, establishment of districts, and Article 7, supplementary district regulations of our zoning resolutions, through the creation of sections of the zoning resolution to regulate solar energy systems, Article 7, Sections 750 to 761. That's correct, Mr. McCormick? Yes, we go through 761.
750 to 764.
Well, there is no.
I changed it,
3
I
or
think
4.
762, yep,
Oh, okay,
7
62.
through 762.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start over, just so we have that clarified.
And one other, do we need to, we were tagging letters to these 2-23-TE?
For the numbers 2, when we were
Oh, when we were
considering
doing 2.
multiples.
Oh,
This is
okay.
under 3.
And so we don't need to put the letter on it?
Correct.
I'm sorry.
So I withdraw what the attempted motion I was making before, and we will start over with case number 3-23-T, zoning resolution text amendment. The zoning commission finds that the proposed text amendments to the Union Township zoning resolution is consistent with the intent of the zoning resolution and the comprehensive land use plan 2030. Modifications being considered apply to Article 6, establishment of districts, and Article 7, supplementary district regulations of our zoning resolutions, through the creation of sections of the zoning resolution to regulate solar energy systems, specifically Article 7, Sections 750 through 762. This commission therefore recommends that text amendments be adopted with the following recommendation. This commission reviews the proposed changes to the zoning resolution and discussed and agreed to modifications to the proposed text, which Mr. McCormick recorded during the commission's meeting. Our recommendation is to forward the proposed text amendment with the recorded modifications to the Board of Trustees for consideration and approval. That concludes my motion.
I'll second that.
We've regularly made and seconded motion. Any discussion from the commission? Hearing none, Mr. McCormick, if you'd call the question, please.
Mr. Outrich?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
Mr. Shannon?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Okay,
So I believe that puts us into new business,
yes.
and I believe we had slated for that some informal discussion about potential proposed text amendments for the future to be considered.
Yes, I actually have couple, but at the same time, I can either present that either in the beginning, or I can go after the board speaks. I know Mr. Lewis has something he wants to go over. Either way's fine.
Well, why don't we defer, and Mr. Lewis, you can proceed with
All right.
an item you'd like to discuss, and we can go from there.
Okay. We had a previous discussion regarding the section of our zoning code, I believe it's 350.4, the authority that the trustees have to override a recommendation from the zoning commission requiring either unanimous or majority. Currently, the status of that resolution is that the trustees only require a majority rule, and I did not remember at the time of the discussion how that transpired. Back in 2008, December 2008, we were presented with a revision from the Ohio Revised Code. I believe it was Mr. Wright presented it to us, that the Ohio legislature made a change via House Bill 562 in the 127th General Assembly that changed the wording in that item. So I'll read it as it currently reads. Override a written recommendation of the zoning commission on a text or map amendment, provided that such legislative action is passed by a majority vote of the township trustees. What happened in 2008 is Ohio Revised Code was changed via House Bill 562, Section 519.12.h, and the ORC was changed to read majority instead of unanimous. So that came down from the ORC. Now, the township has to abide by ORC rules and regulations unless the township has adopted limited home rule, which we have. However, limited home rule only applies to items not specifically addressed in the Ohio Revised Code, where this item is. So the question, it does not appear, and I'll read actually the motion as it read, and this was a concern at the time. Let's see. The motion that actually I presented during the meeting in December 2008 was per section 321.1 of the Union Township zoning resolution. The zoning commission recommends the following text amendment to section 350.4 of the Union Township zoning resolution be adopted. We recommend the text majority vote be changed to unanimous vote. I'm sorry, that's not, I am reading the wrong one. This is how the 2008 one read. The zoning commission finds that the proposed text amendment to the Union Township's zoning resolution reflects recent change in section 519.12 of the Ohio Revised Code initiated by House Bill 562. Prior to this latest revision of the ORC, a unanimous vote by the township trustees was required to deny or modify the zoning commission's recommendations. The newly revised section 519.12.h now only requires a majority vote of the township trustees to deny or modify the zoning commission's recommendations, thus diminishing the authority and effectiveness of the township zoning commission. As our zoning resolution must comply with ORC regulations, this commission unfortunately has no other option other than to recommend the text amendment be adopted. So at the time, it was explained to us that we did not have an option but to authorize that change. Now, whether that's still true today or not, I am not sure. I still would be in favor of seeing majority change to unanimous, to put it back the way it was. I think it provides us with a bit more authority. Without it, we really don't have any authority. And why it was changed to majority, I mean, that's a given. If it's not unanimous, then a simple majority is what's going to override any type of, or allow a motion to go forward. I don't know what drove 512, House Bill 512, and what was behind that, but I would request that Mr. McCormick and his staff possibly look into this and see whether or not there is an option for us to modify that portion of the code. Can we do it legally? And if not, obviously we can't. But if we can, I would like to, at least pursue looking at changing that text. But as it stands today, and as it was explained to us in 2008, we did not have the option.
And just to follow up on that, prior to tonight's meeting, I had found the 1959 zoning resolution, and that's the older looking single page that I pulled, page 38, section 7 regarding action of township trustees. acknowledges what the rule was from 1959, at least until 1994, where I found the 1994 ordinance and also put that on the table tonight. And they are worded a little different, but it's the same in terms of the fact that at the time those were both written, those sections required a unanimous legislative action to overturn a recommendation from the zoning commission. So I had not yet figured out when it changed, but, Mr. Lewis was able to pinpoint when it changed, so I can do some research on that. And I can do some more research prior to the next meeting and let you know if it is something that we can legally change, and if so, craft something, because it essentially would be a small section of text to change.
And then we certainly would have to have, and what's interesting is, if we can make this change, put it back the way it was, it would require only, as currently stands, only a majority of the trustees to change it back. Once it changed back, then it would require unanimous trustees to modify it again and to modify or change any of our previous recommendations going forward. So it's an important step, and it takes a lot of thought. But I think it's one well worth exploring, and I personally do feel that it would be better for everyone involved if we had this back to unanimous instead of majority. But I appreciate Mr. McCormick looking into this and briefing us at the next meeting.
Yeah, I think we're all interested to hear more and to understand what the potential options are. So if we can get more information on that, that would be very helpful.
One thing, I have a question regarding that, just to mention.
Yes.
If we, just trying to think a little hypothetically here, if we didn't pass it unanimously, and we inserted the language that the trustees had to override our decision unanimously, how does that work?
It only applies to the trustees. The 350.4 only applies to the trustees' ability to override a zoning commission recommendation. So a zoning commission recommendation is majority, and that's it. If we had 3-2, it still passes, and that's what goes to the trustees as a passed recommendation from the Board of Zoning, from our board, for the zoning commission. So it doesn't, whether we passed it 3-2 or 4-1, it doesn't matter. That's still a passing. So since we're not approving anything somebody sent to us that was approved from a commission, then we don't have that same limitation.
I got you. So I'm just kind of wondering if changing it to unanimous is not possible, would it be possible to amend the majority ruling to match what a majority would be with ours? So like say, maybe we passed 4-1, then maybe they would need to have 2 to 3 to pass.
Well, there's only
It's
three
like-
There's only three.
trustees.
Yeah.
So it's either, and that's what's interesting about the whole, it was puzzling to me why this was ever even changed from the legislature is, well, if you've only got 3 trustees, which all Ohio townships have 3 trustees, as far as my understanding is, unless I'm wrong, but I believe it's all 3 trustees. Well, changing from unanimous, if it's not going to be unanimous, it still has to be a majority. and I don't know, I'd like to know where House Bill 562 got originated, but we're going back in time too far to probably find out who was the author of that in the legislature and what the reasoning was behind it. But since it's only 3 members of the board, I don't know how we convert, a 5-member zoning commission to a 3-member board. It's still going to be 2 to 1 or unanimous. That's not the only way their vote can go.
Even if there were a way to calculate like parity to make that work, we have the same fundamental question with that, which is, are we permitted under law to make this modification
Right.
at all? So we have to figure that out first, whether we're preempted by state law or whether state law allows for us to have a more restrictive resolution if we so choose, and really if the trustees so choose. So I'll be very curious to hear what the response is, and then we can decide what we'd like to do from there after more discussion.
I totally agree with what you're saying. I think to Mr. Outrich's point, like if the zoning commission were to forward unanimous recommendations and they could potentially then, if it did require the unanimous recommendations by the zoning commission did require a unanimous decision to overturn, I could see some thought in doing it that way. But you have to be able to do it first at any stretch, so that gets to your point. And that's the part we have to figure out.
Oh, I didn't realize, is that what you were,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you were saying, I apologize. So if the difference, a different weight being passed to the trustees from a unanimous zoning commission vote as opposed to a partial, a
Right.
majority. I see. That's interesting, yeah, that
Which
is an
that would
interesting
make
thought.
more sense, because if you have a divided case, it could go divided either way, but the unanimous cases are the ones that I think would be more interesting to have that kind of provision.
It is, that's interesting, I hadn't thought of that.
And then how do you treat abstentions on the commission, right?
Then it's not unanimous.
That would be my argument, but if we have the authority to craft the resolution and we're not preempted, you could play with that.
You could.
Well, that's when I would ask the
see your
question, if we
point.
know going into a case that we're gonna have an abstention, whether we can get one of the alternates to sit on that particular case.
Right, or, because some people hear, I mean, it's rare, but some people will hear the case and then abstain from the case, and it's like, well, we have a quorum, and if the entire, it's just, anyway, it's all academic right now until we have an answer, so we're not
Right,
really,
and most
the
of
issue's
those-
not really right, but,
In most of those, it's relation, close
Right.
involvement, or something that
but the proper course of action, if you know it ahead of time, would be to not sit in that meeting and let
right,
an alternate
well,
take
I,
it. But it's yeah, I know.
yeah, I've seen them get up and walk in another room there while they voted, I mean,
So, does anyone else, aside from Mr. McCormick, have anything they'd like to address? Do we have any further conversation on? Okay, then Mr. McCormick, I know you've got some items you'd like to.
Yeah, so
present.
I have a whole list of things that we could potentially hit as our next potential changes to the zoning resolution, but the two that I selected to look at were regarding changes to the paving requirement, particularly for residential property. Right now, if someone were to, is applying to build a home in Union Township, regardless of how much land or how long the driveway is, they're required to have a paved driveway. And talking this over with the zoning inspector, he and I think, are in general agreement that, in some cases, that might be a little extreme, have people put in a driveway that could be several hundred feet long. And so, what I was looking at is different examples of where a paved driveway was only required for a certain amount, because in the past, the way I've handled this and working with the engineering people is that they essentially want it paved closer to the road, and they don't want gravel by the road because they don't want it tearing up the road, they don't want the dust that accumulates out by the road, it causes like a visibility issue. So it's more of a safety and more of a maintenance concern. So I floated the idea to him of saying, well, what if we just had the pavement on, the bigger lots, for example, be that they have to pave, let's say the first 50 feet of the driveway, and then beyond that, it can be gravel. And I think in our conversations, he was open to that idea. We've got some cases that we've talked about where, several hundred feet of driveway was put in to put in a house, and it's a pretty big expense. And, realistically, you have to ask yourself if it's necessary, because on these bigger tracts of land, some of the neighbors might already be grandfathered if the tract is that large. It's not something that we run across every day, but we run across it enough that it comes up several times a year. So I did find something that is along this example. I looked at a couple different ways to do things, and a couple examples I found, the driveways in residential areas, it's mathematical according to the impervious surface coverage, including the house. And when I looked at that it got us into a whole area that could be a lot more difficult, in my opinion, to try to manage and calculate all these little things. So I found an example where, in what you're seeing here, where it even shows a diagram that there's an apron that has to be improved, and the driveway has to be improved within that apron, it's usually some sort of combination of a dust-free durable surface, and a lot of times they'll reference like the Portland cement and/or asphalt, which is fine. I don't know that 25 feet is the magic number. It could be 50, it could be 100 feet. So my thought is if the board is open to looking at this, doing it this way, what I would do is I would contact the engineering people with the county and say, hey, what would be your recommendation? Because 25 seems like it'd be the minimum when you think about, how big the parking spaces are. We just had kind of a discussion about that. 25 feet's not much more in terms of length than a parking space. So, in the past, I think the number I've heard floated and working with some engineering people has been more like 50 feet. And 50 feet seems like it'd be more reasonable to me. That way the integrity, out of the road and the dust and so forth seems like it's less likely to be an issue. Just kind of wanted some feedback as to whether or not you guys are in general agreement. I found one other example, and the other example that I came across, it was limited to lots that were essentially greater than an acre where you could do this. So we would have to also find that balance as well, because we wouldn't want to do this in a platted subdivision, which for the newer driveways, it's probably required anyways on a newer subdivision, but on the ones that are newer and it's not in the covenants or restrictions, we would want to make sure that a provision like that was put in there, like a lot size. So it'd probably be the estate residential areas, may or may not include R1 lots, and it would be lots of a certain size, I think is where we'd be looking at that change. And then the footage for edge of pavement to where the apron would stop would be the other part of it.
I thought we already had, like the first 10 feet or something had to be a hard surface.
All of it has to be a hard surface right now.
It does, and I don't think that makes sense. I think the apron idea, the less impervious surface that we create in our environment is to me, is the better. It makes perfect sense to keep the gravel off the street and keep it away, so 25 feet, 50 feet, whatever. But then beyond that, why are we forcing these impervious surfaces? I know the trustees reviewed, and this applies to beyond residential. They reviewed a proposal for a storage facility on Old 74, and they were presenting gravel as tightly packed gravel in that area back there, which I see absolutely nothing wrong with. They were going to pave the whole entranceway and then go gravel. And with those buildings, you want that surface impervious. You don't want all of that paved and the rooftops going down on it. Then you've got a water management issue. But from a water management standpoint, I think that forces too much impervious surface. And now in a wide open area, yeah, it doesn't have that effect. But in tightly packed areas, like a storage facility, I see nothing wrong with that being gravel. But yet our requirements currently are it has to all be paved. And
Well, it's unenforced then.
No,
I
it's
see
not
'em.
enforced.
if people get a permit and it's a new construction, it's
Right.
enforced.
Right.
New.
It has not been
These
enforced
are new
well.
constructions.
Right.
In general, when the staff finds out that there's a driveway that's a newer improvement and it's not impervious, they are then sent like a notice that they need to take care of that. There may be some that are getting missed here and there, but, I mean, the
The older
idea
ones are
is-
grandfathered in, they're existing, but
Sure.
but new ones, yeah, I thought all new ones, I didn't think
Yeah,
many
I-
new ones were getting.
I haven't seen much new construction.
I thought it was,
Other than subdivisions and.
someplace I thought it was 10 feet or 15 feet or something. Had to be
No,
hard
it's the
surface.
whole driveway. If you want to improve a driveway, you have to improve it with blacktop. You can re-gravel an existing driveway, don't get me wrong, you can re-gravel an existing driveway, but if you've got a gravel driveway currently, let's say, and it's been there for 30 years, and you want to add a building back behind it and extend the driveway to it, technically, that extension has to be impervious. That can't be gravel, even though the whole rest of it is gravel and is allowed to be gravel because it's been that way for 30 years, and the extension has to be paved. And I don't think that makes sense. I think we go a little bit overboard in some of that, and I'd be willing to look at at reducing that requirement on impervious surface. But
Yeah,
I agree, you got to walk a tight line. When you get into residential subdivisions, you don't want to see a bunch of gravel driveways. But then again, 50 feet would cover that 90% of the time, or the lot size would cover it.
Right.
So those are things all to have to be considered. It's not just, throw it out there and let's just allow gravel driveways. It's has to be carefully done, as you mentioned,
No,
from
no.
my opinion anyway.
We have a lot of driveways that's 500 feet long in the town.
Yes.
The other part that you addressed, Mr. Lewis, that I've run across is that there are some instances where, as an exception, someone will come in and ask for a gravel improvement over so much of a commercial or industrial lot. And typically, my experience is those are, when it's not a dust-free durable surface, where it's like asphalt or concrete or something that would otherwise be similar to providing that requirement of being dust-free and durable, which could be like a porous pavement or something. That's typically handled as a variance if it's above a certain percentage. Or in this case, it could potentially be handled as an overlay case if it's, a lot of the overlay cases are going to be the commercial and industrial land in the township. I don't know that I've seen a lot of examples where, there was an allowance for gravel in those scenarios. Certainly not as the majority of the site. I do agree that for certain sites, it probably makes more sense, and that for purposes of stormwater management, it makes a lot more sense to have less impervious surface sometimes, because otherwise you're forced to put some kind of detention, retention,
Right.
or underground system in. I think it seems like everybody's in generally agreement that or proposing a change for residential purposes seems to be okay. I guess the question then becomes like how the board would view the commercial and industrial uses, because I can craft one that tries to encompass all the different uses. I guess my question now is, if residential isn't an acceptable use in certain situations, should I also be looking to construct an ordinance that would also address commercial and industrial in certain situations as well? And it would probably have to do with, again, like the size of the lot. I don't know.
So help me understand the variance aspect of it. So when you say a variance, now, and I'll go back to the one that I saw on the trustees meeting a month ago, where they were looking at the storage facility. That was a B1 business, and they were keeping it B1. When they presented that, they were asking for variances for setbacks and for the gravel. Can those variances be authorized right then and there by the trustees, can be allowed during the B1 review? They don't have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals to
So
get...
that is the case with the overlay cases, and that is, from what I understand, has been a cause of consternation among the Board of Zoning Appeals members, and I've only been able to talk to them really one time, so I've had limited contact with them directly, but in talking to some of the other staff members, there's a feeling that some of the cases that the trustees are dealing with would normally have otherwise been sent to the Board of Zoning Appeals to handle some of those issues, and when the overlay districts were created, the manner in which they were created kind of funneled everything to the trustees rather than the Board of Zoning Appeals for those scenarios. And in that particular case that you're talking about, there were 4, if not 5 different potential variances involved, which anytime the staff sees an application like that, we try to tell people, look, the number and the quantity of what you're asking for might be a bit much. You really want to go in asking for the minimal amount of number of changes, and also like the amount, quantity of change that you're asking for. So normally we would advise somebody and steer somebody away from that many changes. Had that been the only issue, as far as whether that particular application just involved a variance for, paving, I mean, that whole case might have been looked at a little differently, because they probably would have configured it a little different. But in that case, it was one of several things that I think caused that one to have that application to be a problem.
would it have been different if but if they had said, instead of B1, we want this to be a PD. Well, if it's a PD, they could have asked for all of that, if I'm not mistaken. And it would have been a little bit simpler to evaluate as a PD than it would have been a B1 with all these variances. I mean, the PD still does require certain setbacks, not as much, honestly, not as much as the B1. The PD setback would have been less from a plan development regulation standpoint than the B1 was requiring setback from a residential property edge, I believe. It's my recollection, it's 25 feet, and the B1 was requiring 100 feet, I believe, something to that effect. But yeah, as a PD, those things are looked at as, they're not considered, I guess, variances, they're just part of the plan, but I guess you do still have to get a variance. If somebody wanted less than 25 feet, then that has to be approved. I didn't ever heard it called a variance though, but it was just approved at the trustee level.
Right, so it may not always be acknowledged as such, but it's essentially what's happening with some of the applications. A lot of the applications, there may only be a single issue that's being addressed that might be more of a variance. On the application that you're talking about more specifically, the applicants, I did not deal with them when they first came in. They had talked to the other planner in the office, and in fact, I didn't even know they were going to apply until it was dropped in our office and no heads up that it was coming in. And the other planner at the time had handled the case up until then and even put the draft staff report together before he left. When I talked to them, I had a number of concerns when I finally saw what they turned in, met with them within the 24 hours that I looked at it on site, and they had no desire to go through two boards. So that nixed the idea of doing a PD. So in that particular instance, it wouldn't matter.
I see.
But we do have conversations with applicants. We do, the staff will explain, your option here, you could go the route of a PD, which involves two boards.
Right.
And some people just don't want to deal with going through the rezone process with two boards, even though it really only adds like maybe a couple weeks, and a little bit more money. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot more money, but it is a little more money and it's a little more time.
I understand.
But kind of getting back to the point for the discussion on the driveways, is the board wanting me to potentially craft some language to address the commercial and industrial uses as well with this scenario?
This driveway situation, is this only township roads?
It would be,
No, it's any,
yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
it would be
I
any
think
driveway.
it's a different deal for the state, isn't it? If the driveway comes off the state highway,
They would have to at least meet the state's requirement,
Yeah,
but
they'd
if
have
we
to-
have,
yeah, right,
if our
that's a
requirement's more restrictive in that case, they
Right.
would have to
Yeah.
follow our requirement, which that's what's happening now.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to take it into the commercial. I'm all for looking at the residential, and maybe that's the first thing that we handle. The commercial, I understand, gets more complicated, and maybe it is best to leave that in the hands of the trustees. I just think that that's a consideration, and I don't want to go changing B1 regulations currently, and I'm not suggesting we get into that, and the industrial regulations. If somebody decides to take the PD route, there is that option available to them, and then those things can be considered via that route. So I'm not proposing digging into the commercial or industrial sections at this time, but residential, I would be up for residential review.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the right dividing line, because business/PD can be addressed via other avenues, but we're really more concerned about residential.
Okay. I can actually think of one case off the top of my head where a similar scenario exists in the time that I've been with the township, where the driveway was a long driveway that led back to a commercial use, which was an overlay case. What's that?
Was it Holman?
No,
They had a
they had a pre-existing gravel driveway for their whole lot in that case. But the case I'm thinking of was over there by the Buxton area, and it was to a facility that's a recreational facility, and the driveway, it's kind of a panhandle lot if I remember right, so the driveway was several hundred feet long. In that case, like, you couldn't even see the building from the road unless the leaves are down probably. In that case, I could see the driveway itself at least being exempt once it gets so far back. That was a unique site though, because when you got to the back, there was a stream, and that the stream ran into what was supposed to be a stormwater basin. But on a flag lot, panhandle lot that is industrial or commercial, I could see that being a possible exception, depending on where it's at.
Can I ask this? I have a question. So can what we address change just driveways? And, you know, the example, and I probably shouldn't have called a specific example, but the storage area with the gravel area or the impervious surface between buildings, that can be, I don't mean to dig into that now, but driveways in general, whether it's driveways for industrial or driveways for residential, can we just look at driveways and the driveway solution apply to industrial, business, and residential? Does that make sense? Because I wouldn't have a problem with an industrial or a business zoned area that had a 300-foot driveway that had the first 25 or 50 feet paved, and then it was gravel beyond that. I don't see a reason to force that to be impervious, especially if it's got heavy equipment running on it. That's becomes a maintenance issue. It's easier to maintain a gravel driveway on their own property in that case than it would be a blacktop surface that keeps fracturing and cracking and requires bi-yearly maintenance. Can what we address be driveways? Can the section, we just don't have a section. We have a section for residential driveways and commercial driveways. So they're separate. So I don't know how we would combine the two. Is that possible?
I think we could have a section address all of it, and I could work on that, and we can look at what I have put together at the next meeting and see whether that looks like it's in good shape, having everything in there, or, you know, if it makes more sense to split it where we have otherwise talked about splitting it for residential.
Okay. Now, if it applies to driveways, does that also include someplace where they're parking something that's not really a driveway, but it's a pull-off? Is it going to cover that as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Typically where this is referenced in codes is the parking.
Where vehicles are being
Areas, right.
transported on and off. Okay.
Yep.
How much are we talking about? 20 feet, 50 feet?
I will probably construct that based on the feedback I get from the engineering people. I have a number I think in my head that makes sense, and I want to see what they think before we put a number in there. And that way I can come back and tell you the people that are more directly involved with this, especially at the county level, if they're reviewing something, what their thoughts are about that, what that number might be.
And I don't think there's, I mean, I have a 220-foot driveway, and when I moved into the house, it was gravel. And we saved money as fast as we could. It took us about 10 years, but we got that paved as soon as we could. We just wanted it paved. And I think a lot of people do, but I think some people don't, and that should be the property owner's prerogative. You know, once you're away from the street, I think there won't be a lot of people saying, oh, now I can have my gravel driveway, but I think that will happen once in a while, but I don't think it's a big thing, and I don't think somebody should have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for that.
Well, we have a case the Board of Zoning Appeals had this last month, actually this month, where the guy has, I think, a flag lot, and he was granted a variance of putting the accessory building prior to the primary structure being built, but it's only like a 1-year difference. And in his scenario, I think he is planning on putting a gravel driveway in, which I didn't know until we actually had the meeting. Because again, I got handed that case, which was predominantly already put together by the other planner at the time. And I didn't want to tell him after he got his variance that he might have to pave his whole driveway, depending on, when he puts that improvement in. But it was the same scenario, I think Panhandle let back a couple hundred feet, and then there's the house and the barn, or the pole barn garage area, so.
But the variance was for the sequence of events that the,
Accessory use before the principal.
and that's news to me. So you have to build the principal currently. The principal has to be built before an accessory structure.
Yeah.
Or at the same time?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's another one I would like to revisit at some point, because I'm sure
I
that
would
comes up
too.
a lot. But the Board of Zoning Appeals, I'd like to have a discussion with them about the cases that they're getting the most, and if they're saying, if they're approving something, like, pretty much every time it comes in, that's usually the indicator that the law needs to be changed.
Yes, I would agree.
If you're always granting that request, whatever it is.
Be very curious how many of those that they would get, though, where your accessory use structure is before the primary structure.
It doesn't happen, what I would say, a lot, but it happens often enough that if it's coming in regularly and they're all getting approved,
Yeah, where the
then it
people,
probably needs to be looked at.
the people
I
want
would
to,
agree if it's happening a lot,
they want to store their windows and
Right.
everything for the house. so they
I
don't
can
get-
see that exactly,
Yeah,
right.
so they don't get stole.
Yeah.
So one of the communities I worked with previously was a county, and before I had started working there almost 20 years ago, literally, they would have half a dozen to a dozen cases for the Board of Zoning Appeals every month, and probably half of those cases, and it was a county, so it was like 10 times the land area we have here. They were the same cases, the description of what we're talking about, where the accessory use was being built before the house, the principal structure.
Yes.
So it happens, but since there's a lot of built-out area here, it's not happening as much. Of course, it's a smaller area, land
Right.
area wise, but it does happen a number of times over the course of a year or a couple of years. We'll come back to that one though.
Okay.
The other issue that I had put in here is we have what are called photometric or illumination plans that we call for on site plans. The problem with that is that there is no foot candle measurement for what people are supposed to abide by on these illumination plans. And so in my dealing with reviewing plans, I've been using a number that I've been familiar with in terms of like telling the applicants when you get to the edge of the property line, would like to keep the foot candle measurement at a half foot candle or 1 foot candle or less, unless it's a pre-existing condition where there's already light and you can't fix it. We don't have anything in there in the code that addresses that as a measurement. So what I would like to do is put a measurement in there that acknowledges what that is. And there's basically we should have a table that's similar to what we're seeing here. I would probably propose something similar to this, but not quite what you're seeing here. So you have your adjacent properties that are residential areas, or you have your adjacent roadways, you have your public roadways versus your private roadways. So this table kind of covers a lot of examples. It doesn't necessarily cover all of them. But I would like to put something like this together for the purposes of clarifying for the staff and for the applicants, this is the number that we're trying to achieve, because right now we don't have the number. And so I'm more or less looking for permission to move forward with that, because right now it's not quantified. We've already run into an instance here in the last couple of weeks where a neighbor complained about the lighting of a new commercial use that was built. And the staff pulled the file for the approved permit, and then I was originally thinking we wouldn't even have a photometric plan at all, and that maybe there wasn't one. Well, we found that there was, and it was approved with the rest of the plan, but there were no, what I would have told them to do in certain areas, the number would have been lower. And so the problem is, like, if the staff says no, we don't really have anything other than, like, it says that the director can say no, essentially, to this request, right? So if we put a number in there and we can stick by it, that would be better for everybody, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And the applicants that I've talked to, even when they're looking to put together the photometric plan, they've agreed, like, hey, it's better to have a number so we know what to aim for. And the people that I've talked to, I mean, some of them have had to make adjustments to their plans, but nobody's complained, like, about it to the point where it's become an issue. So, basically just looking to add that kind of section in the text.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense from both a building planning standpoint and from an enforcement standpoint. You want a fixed metric, not just ad hoc decisions that you enforce when you want to. That makes perfect sense.
All right, that's all I have for this evening.
Okay. Any other new business? Hearing none, any motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Got a regularly made and seconded motion to adjourn. Mr. McCormick, if you would call, please.
Mr. Outridge?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
Mr. Shannon?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes. We are adjourned at 7:55. Thank you, gentlemen.